rooms, but that fear of being caught, that search for a greater high. And I looked at him and I said, so tell me, when are you going skydiving? And he looked at me and dropped his jaw and he said, how did you know? I had it scheduled for next week.
Oh.
The sex addicts will search for their stimulus-seeking brains. And even as we're being saturated by so much stimuli in our culture, not just sexual stimulation, we're a culture that seems to be constantly in search of the greater high. Several years ago, I had my family at an amusement park in Kansas City, Missouri called Worlds of Fun. And we got off the Ferris wheel and I looked to my right, and they've got this contraption where they would put you in this harness, attach it to a cable, hoist it way back up in the air, and then they just release the cable and it's free flying right through there. And I looked at that thing, and I looked at my wife and I said, you know, I ought to be standing here handing out business cards for repressed suicidal tendencies or something. This is crazy. And people were paying extra to do this thing. I mean, y'all remember when a roller coaster used to be exciting? Yeah, to kids today, I think it's pretty boring. I was sharing this story with a friend when I got back to Atlanta, and he said, you know what I think that is, Richard? We're constantly looking for the greater high. And I think as a culture, we have gotten to that place. And so, you know, the sex addicts will definitely buy into that and will look for more high-risk behavior just to create that excitement. Becoming sexual despite the fear of sexually transmitted diseases. This is one where, yeah, the just say no doesn't work. If it did, Nancy Reagan's campaign would have eliminated drug use from the planet. But the fact is, even the fear of getting an STD is not stopping people from acting out. I had one guy a few years ago who was actually trying to act out with women who had STDs, and it was like he was playing a game of Russian roulette, seeing how far he could go without catching one. But becoming sexual despite that fear. Doing something you don't like in order to please someone else, and the next one goes along with that, and that's doing something that's sexually painful. I tend to see these somewhat more in the women who have been in the adult entertainment industry. I don't see, believe it or not, they're not there because they're sex addicts necessarily. Most of the women who are in that industry are there for other reasons, but these are a couple of things we do tend to see there. This next one is a big one. This is violating your beliefs despite many pledges to stop. As one addict I know said that I could stop, said I stopped 587 times. Problem was I couldn't stay stopped. Well, staying stopped is the issue. And as we look at the cycle of the addiction and how you see it play out, one of the things that we'll find with people who are struggling with this is that when they get done acting out, all the guilt and shame and remorse sets in, and it's all of the promises, I'll never do it again, I'll never want to experience this again, I'm done, it's over, until the next shame attack hits, and until they're triggered, and then they're back into the same cycle. One of the fastest ways I know of for people to end up clinically depressed, or it's with some kind of an anxiety disorder, is to not live in harmony with your own values. And this is what gets a lot of people. This is where their conscience will get them if they haven't split off and dissociated from it completely. Eventually it will catch up to them because they've got to reconcile their values with their behavior, with what they're doing. And if they can't, that's when the depression and anxiety and other issues really start to come in. Or they change their values, which is what some have chosen to do. But violating your beliefs despite many pledges to stop. Avoiding social or family obligations in order to be sexual. Now, this is one where we might see a man who, when it's time to go to the kids' Little League game, will suddenly develop a headache or a stomach ache so that he can stay home to be alone with the computer. And they will look for ways in order to be isolated so that they can act out, but avoiding the social or avoiding family obligations and isolating. Losing track of time. It's where you hear people doing those binges, and they'll binge 12, 14 hours and think, oh gosh, you know, I thought this was just an hour. I know the internet, I think, tends to lend itself to that, even in non-sexual things. I'll never forget the first time I discovered YouTube. And I punched in the name of one of my favorite singers, John Denver. And if one video leads to dozens more, to dozens more, to dozens more, and I'm thinking, oh, okay, I'll watch for half an hour. The next thing I know, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. It's very easy to get into things like that and to lose track of time. One of the men we worked with, he and his wife had a little routine where she had to leave 10 to 15 minutes before he did to go to work every morning. And so what he would do is he would get online and would say, I'm only going to look for 10 minutes. 3 hours later, he still isn't at work. And so losing track of time can be one of the symptoms of this problem. And this last one really is a summary of all of them. And it's when sex becomes the central organizing principle of your life. When your talk, your language, behavior revolves around how can I act out sexually or how can I be sexual, that's where we're crossing the line and getting into some of the unmanageable, addictive sexuality. Well, in terms of how we look at sexual addiction and its behaviors, sex addiction itself is an umbrella term that is actually going to cover a whole variety of behaviors. And so it may be that it covers compulsive masturbation, the use of pornography, internet pornography, extramarital affairs, anonymous sex, same-sex acting out. There can be all kinds of presentations of sexual addiction. But it's an umbrella term that's going to cover all of those, much like in alcoholism we would say, an alcoholic, that we don't just say a beer addict or a wine addict or a champagne addict. Alcoholic covers all of them. Now, I've already made a number of analogies between alcoholism and sexual addiction. There is a key difference, though, in the two. Sex addiction is what we would call a core addiction. If someone wants to quit drinking, they want to quit smoking, they want to give up a drug, they can put those things down, stop them, and they never have to touch them again. With sexual addiction, it's different because your body is created by God to respond sexually. And so this isn't something you can run away from. Much like we can't tell a food addict, don't ever eat again. We're not going to tell a workaholic, don't work. And that's what makes this a tougher addiction to deal with, because it's not something that you're going to give up, it's something you're going to change your relationship with. And that's what makes this so hard. We have had so many people come through groups saying, hey, I kicked crack cocaine, I'd rather fight crack cocaine than fight pornography. Because that's the level of difficulty that we're talking about. And crack is some pretty lethal stuff. This is some of Patrick Carnes' work, and it's just looking at how the cycle of addiction might play out. And these are some of the patterns that you might see in some of the people that you're working with. Now, when Dr. Carnes did this originally, I believe he called this up here family wounds. I changed it to the wound itself. And the reason why I do that is not all wounds come from within your family. We are in a culture, I believe, that is very sexually wounding. We are seeing the wounding come from perfect strangers. We're hearing stories of school teachers acting out with their students. And so it's not just family wounds that create the problem. The woundedness can come from a variety of sources. Well, out of that woundedness will come a profound sense of shame. Shame by itself, I don't believe, is always a bad thing. I mean, I certainly would not want people to be proud of some of the things that they're doing. The problem is when it becomes a shame-based identity. And it's the difference between making a mistake versus being a mistake. And so many sex addicts and the spouses of the sex addicts believe that they are a mistake. They have very much are rooted in shame-based identities. Some friends of mine out in Houston, Cliff and Jeannie Poe with Dimensional Journey, gave me an acronym for this. Shame, self-hatred, accepting my enslavement. Self-hatred, accepting my enslavement. And when you get stuck there and it becomes your identity, it